This is the artificial intelligence voice of Kyle Fordred narrating this pod slice summary of the Full Send podcast. The Full Send podcast features a thrilling conversation between the host Kyle Fordred and their guest Patrick Bet David. During their discussion, they delve into Bet David's background and his life before making a name for himself in the world of business. Bet David shares his experiences and challenges of growing up in post-revolution Iran. Much to the host's amusement, they confess to having limited knowledge about Bet David, initially misunderstanding him as being involved in the real estate industry. Bet David verbalizes comparisons of himself to renowned broadcaster Joe Rogan, drawing parallels between their different fields, but unifying dedication to delivering thoughtful, insightful content to their audiences. Their conversation takes a turn as Bet David reveals his Iranian background and his experiences growing up in the aftermath of the Iranian Revolution. He mentions his recent interview with the former Crown Prince of Iran, Reza Pahlavi, who shockingly claims he does not want to take up his father's throne. A major revelation that is expected to astound the Iranian diaspora and global political circles. Bet David relates his personal experience being an immigrant and having to dispel stereotypical perceptions of his home country. While conceding that Iran underwent a tumultuous period following the revolution, he fondly reminisces about stories of Iran's once thriving history, likening it to Dubai's current bustling aura. He further elaborates upon how Iran was perceived prior to the revolution, a place of glamour where renowned personalities like Elizabeth Taylor would often visit. The host and guest also engage in lighthearted banter, discussing popular movies and actors. Bet David commends actor Shia LaBeouf's dedication to acting, applauding his professionalism. Notably, Bet David underscores the harsh reality of living in post-revolution Iran, recounting incidents of kidnappings and illegal organ trafficking that were prevalent during his early years. Adding a sobering tone amidst the joviality of the podcast, Bet David's anecdotes serve as a glimpse into a much harsher reality in post-revolution Iran. The hosts dig deep into Bet David's unique perspective, coming from a place that persistently prioritized education, considering that the mathematical aptitude of Iranian students was vastly superior to that of their American counterparts. Despite their struggles and fears, post-revolution Iran had its significant moments of thriving. Bet David notably contrasts it with the American education system, implying its underwhelming performance and thus making the interviewee's subsequent success in the U.S. even more intriguing. Several personal experiences profoundly influenced Bet David's success trajectory. Notably, his account of a family gathering outlines the fiscal pressures that propelled him to success. His family's dismissal and undervaluation of his father's accomplishments acted as a catalyst, driving him to ensure that everyone acknowledged and respected his father's legacy. Another crucial aspect of Bet David's journey is his planned military career. He shares an anecdote where a friend convinced him to change his life's trajectory by leaving the military and joining the civilian workforce. Against all odds, he decided to selflessly trust his friend's advice, turning away from re-enlisting in the military. His transition into civilian life ultimately landed him a job at Morgan Stanley, which became his entry point into the world of business. A Syrian Christmas party marked a significant turning point in Bet David's life. Insults hurled at his father by a relative ignited a fire within him. This rage was the catalyst that pushed him to succeed, not only in honoring his father, but also in proving his success to the world. Surprisingly, the byproduct of his quest for validation wasn't just wealth. It was also the satisfaction of creating something meaningful and impactful. Bet David provides insight into his multifaceted business world, where he not only produces content, but also runs a consulting firm. He reveals that his consulting firm could potentially become a billion-dollar company within a few years. He's not only managed to successfully navigate the complex American business landscape, but also managed to build an empire where he's helping other companies succeed. Furthermore, Bet David seems to have a keen eye for political alliances, drawing parallels to his own alliances in the business world. He views potential alliances within the political sphere, particularly between Elon Musk and Tucker Carlson, as possible game changers. While speculation, his adept interpretation of these connections indicates his ordered and analytical thought process. Bet David's life and career exemplify resilience, determination, and masterful navigation of unique challenges. His journey celebrates the spirit fighting against all odds and achieving success. The continuation of the podcast dives further into Patrick Bet David's insightful viewpoints on politics, notably regarding debates on potential VP choices and possible alliances. Bet David states that, unlike his initial run, Trump now would need to pick a VP capable of taking the reins and perpetuating his administration's line of thinking for 8 years. He perceives Tucker Carlson as a viable choice, suggesting Tucker's powerful alliance with Elon Musk could be leveraged. He also notes the possibility that Tucker could serve as a mediator in reconciling differing views within the political sphere. Additionally, Bet David proposes possible names for Trump's VP, like Governor Noam and Nikki Haley, but he ultimately concludes that a certain strategic alignment is necessary. He believes that the VP needs to attract audiences that aren't yet within Trump's influence, re-emphasizing why Tucker, with his potential connection to Elon Musk, might be the perfect candidate. There's also a deeper discussion about the political future of Governor Ron DeSantis, who was featured on the podcast recently. Bet David suggests that DeSantis has yet to demonstrate the personal appeal and relatability necessary for a presidential run. DeSantis, in Bet David's view, needs to show his human side to win support. Taking a detour from politics, Bet David philosophizes about the balance between being selfish and selfless. In his perspective, he states that the ideal individual would be 70 selfish and 30 selfless. He speculates that Trump may tip that balance a little further towards selfishness, which underscores his analysis of Trump's potential VP. His conversation concludes by drawing analogies from the sports world, with instances where players had to understand and accept their roles for the team to triumph. He implies that political figures need to follow suit and identify their strengths. Are they the ones to carry flags or lead the pack? This reiterates the central theme of Bet David's argument, the need for strategic alliances and understanding your role for ultimate political victory. Continuing further into the Full Send podcast, Kyle Forgerd and guest Patrick Bet David engage in a lively discussion about the political dynamics within the United States. Bet David shares his perspective on why he believes Ron DeSantis lost traction within the MAGA movement because of his refusal to play the flag carrier role. He suggests that DeSantis made a strategic error by not aligning himself closely enough with Trump, hinting at an underlying power tussle between the two political figures. Highlight of the session takes place when Bet David illustrates the politics of ego and influence using a sports analogy, asserting that just like in a team, one person has to emerge as the leader, but not before giving proper credit to those who boosted their success. He implies that DeSantis may have prematurely assumed the alpha role, leading to a potential undercut of his political progress. In the realm of prospective candidates, the podcast conversation swerves towards current Governor Kristi Noem and her potential to increase her exposure through proposed one-on-one debates. Bet David postulates this could result in a victory for Noem, provided she seizes the opportunity to distinguish herself. From political maneuvers, they transition discussing the allure of characters within the political world, the precondition being their ability to keep audiences engaged. Bet David goes on to argue that Governor DeSantis's diminishing interest amongst netizens, possibly because he often repeats his talking points, makes him less appealing. The dialogue later ventures into the tricky dynamics of the Democratic Party, particularly around the figure of Kamala Harris. Bet David predicts that sidelining Harris for another potential candidate like Newsom could backfire on the party, giving the Republicans an easy argument against the Democrats' commitment to diversity and equal representation. Bet David concludes by emphasizing the importance of politics in day-to-day life and why it is critical to remain engaged, thereby encouraging the Full Send hosts to continue featuring political guests despite the somewhat controversial nature of these discussions. In the continuing dialogue of the Full Send podcast, host Kyle Forgerd and guest Patrick Bet David examine the current political climate, predicting potential consequences. Bet David, the entrepreneur and economist, deconstruct the complicated dynamics of political power and the fight for national respect. He claims a strong leader imposes both fear and respect, and stresses the need for such leadership in America in light of the global tensions. Drawing analogies from the relationship dynamics within a family, Bet David argues that just as a child needs both love and respect, so do nations and organizations need a leader that commands respect and stirs fear. He believes that the current leadership, specifically President Biden, fails to inspire either of these feelings, giving way to global powers acting as bullies. An engaging discussion ensues about the national and international troubles that America currently faces, including tensions in Ukraine, Russia, and the Israel-Palestine conflict. Bet David voices his concerns over these escalating issues, adding that unless a leader takes charge who can effectively handle these situations, things would take a turn for the worse. Adding another layer to the discussion, the conversation explores how the political climate affects the social media platforms and the role of companies like YouTube in these times. David illustrates how these media giants are akin to global influencers, their actions sometimes shaping public opinion and altering the course of political histories. Furthermore, David highlights the importance of laws in a capitalist society, explaining how a country without laws can hinder capitalism's progress. He emphasizes the need for accountability and consequence amid the chaos and predicts 2024 will be the year of chaos. Lastly, David praises Elon Musk for purchasing Twitter, viewing it as an important tipping point in society and an act against censorship. He closes with a call for greater accountability for actions during the pandemic, especially for figures like Dr. Fauci, to prepare better for future pandemic events. In the segment of the Full Send podcast, the host and Patrick David examined the tumultuous power dynamics within the Daily Wire, a conservative American media company. A rift had formed between Ben Shapiro, Daily Wire's co-founder and contributor Candace Owens, leading to public squabbles. David critiques this public infighting, arguing it could deter potential contributors from joining due to imposed fear, troubles if they disagree on certain issues, particularly in this case, the issue being Israel, which is a non-negotiable stance for Shapiro. Then the conversation shifts to the Israeli-Palestine conflict. David brings up the grim impact that violence, particularly involving children, has on sparking cycles of retribution and fostering future generations of animosity. Any life is too many, David states, acknowledging the human cost of conflict. Drawing from history, David explains how the Shah, then leader of Iran, called out the overbearing influence of the Jewish community in global finance and media during a 1976 interview with Mike Wallace of 60 Minutes. This controversial stance eventually led to his expulsion 2 years later. He uses this event to illuminate the significant influence and power that the Jewish community holds on a global scale. Finally, considering the aftermath of such conflicts, David worries about the devastating toll it can have on the nations involved. He argues that the current administration may solve the present issue, but at the same time may be setting the stage for countless wars in the future. He provides an exhaustive discussion on why wars in the Middle East might never end due to the deep-rooted and prolonged differences between the nations. Specifically, for Israel and Palestine, David cites the lack of a unifying figure or organization that could bridge their intense divide. He alludes to some progress made during Trump's administration, but acknowledges the continuing tension. As of present, no potential solutions were suggested. In the continuing discussion, David shares his thoughts about parenting and raising up generations of capable individuals. According to him, setting early and high standards for children leads to people who can meet those benchmarks and create a more capable society. He shares anecdotes about his child's rigorous schedule involving multiple sports. According to David, children can handle far more than we typically suspect, and pushing them physically and mentally cultivates their natural instincts. David highlights the necessity of raising standards. He explains the later you set standards, the less people are going to follow it. The sooner you set standards and you keep it, the more it's normal. This belief isn't limited to his children, but extends to areas such as the military and schools. Diving into context of competitive sports, David suggests that being pushed around and getting your ass kicked is good for you. He appeals to society to challenge children more, expect more from them, which may contradict parenting trends towards gentleness and low expectations. Though this may raise eyebrows, David insists that high standards are an expression of love and care. Transitioning into the American education system, David laments what he sees as low standards in comparison to other countries, citing China's iChecks students and contrast it with America's more lenient approach. He anticipates issues in the future, stating, I think in 20 years we're in trouble. The conversation later steers towards parenting tactics, discussing the use of incentives for good behavior and high performance. He insists that setting the tone and standards allows children to choose their behavior and the subsequent consequences. David finishes this segment by bringing up a striking statistic. In 1940, 90 systovevia, as of now, it's 40 F40 ever born to a single mother, which he attributes to changes in welfare benefits. He postulates that the increase in welfare benefits effectively reduced the incentive to find a committed partner, which in turn increased the percentage of single parents, Based on his analysis, Bet David firmly believes in the impact of incentives in shaping individual and societal behaviors. As the conversation with Bet David further progresses, the discussion dives deep into societal trends and relationships. A surprising statistic that the host brings up is that currently the number of 30-year-old virgins is at an all-time high. The reason, according to Bet David, technology, people are having sex with their phones, meaning they're replacing real, meaningful human interactions and relationships with digital substitutes such as pornography and OnlyFans. That conversation then takes on a more personal tone as both hosts contemplate their own relationships. Bet David reflects that it depends on what the person wants. For him, he was ready for marriage at 30. However, he stresses that if someone isn't done having fun and exploring life, they should not rush into it. Bet David acknowledges that societal tides are shifting with fewer people getting married. For him, this points towards a shift in what men and women both look for in relationships. He emphasizes that men should strive to be doers who are responsible and have their lives together. He also adds his endorsement of prenuptial agreements, insisting that they aren't about expecting a relationship to fail, but rather about protecting oneself. Delving into the topic of divorce, he brings up the high-profile examples of Larry David and Jeff Bezos, both of whom had to part with substantial amounts of money during their divorces. For Bet David, it only reinforces his belief on prenups. Shifting gears, Bet David provides a glimpse into his early life. He recalls an anecdote about working under a charismatic guy who drove luxurious cars, sold no gym memberships, yet maintained an extravagant lifestyle. This later led him into an underworld of crime where he was offered $4,000 a week for recovering a debt. Although he enjoyed the prospect of making easy money, he deferred and chose a different path despite a week-long contemplation. This lively and at times controversial conversation certainly gives the audience food for thought about societal norms, personal goals, and the choices they make. In this section of the Full Send podcast, Kyle Forgerd and Patrick Bet David continue their spirited and frank discussion. Bet David moves from personal anecdotes to more general reflections on life, success, and relationships. Recalling an incident, Bet David narrates a shocking encounter his acquaintance had with Hollywood casting couch culture situation that could have potentially compromised his integrity. Bet David's tale is a candid insight into certain unsavory aspects of Hollywood, emphasizing the importance of values and personal integrity even in the face of opportunities. The conversation shifts gears to Bet David's incredible real estate purchase, jaw-dropping $20, 4 cents $1 million property in Fort Lauderdale, the most expensive ever purchased there. With 11,000 square feet, 800 FT of water frontage, and world-renowned neighbors like Messi, it's clear Bet David has achieved an enviable level of success. When Ford asks about the most common piece of advice he gives, Bet David's response is both straightforward and insightful. He stresses the importance of community and aligning oneself with a successful, experienced leader from whom one can learn. Recollecting his own experiences, he advises young, emerging professionals to involve themselves in communities, lead by achievement-oriented individuals to accelerate their learning process. So a conversation between Forgerd and Bet David then turns more personal, discussing their individual love lives. Bet David describes his unusual first encounter with his wife, proving that love can spring from the most unpredictable circumstances. He also recommends the book One-on-One Questions to Ask Before You Get Engaged as a beneficial exercise for any relationship. This segment of the conversation presents a variety of candid insights into Hollywood, financial success, and relationship dynamics, engaging and filled with surprising revelations. The dialogue carries on with the energy and thoroughness characteristic of the Full Send podcast. Continuing on with the conversation, Bet David introduces Forgerd to a book titled 101 Questions to Ask Before You Get Engaged, providing a unique perspective on relationships. The book consists of 101 questions spread across 101 pages, with each page posing a unique question. Bet David recommends this book as a beneficial tool, especially for those who are considering marriage due to the serious and practical topics it tackles. He suggests that this exercise promotes introspection, revealing whether one is truly ready for marriage or not. The dialogue touches upon some specific questions from the book, like, what baggage do you bring to the table? How many days can you handle me being away? What if I have health issues and can't have sex for 6 months? These questions aim to facilitate dialogue on extremely personal subjects, possibly preventing future misunderstandings. Bet David firmly supports the idea of avoiding future arguments in a relationship, akin to business partners explicitly defining terms before starting ventures. Echoing Bet David's sentiments, Forgeard expresses his appreciation for the book's practical approach to understanding relationship dynamics. As the conversation progresses, Bet David, Forgeard, and their team share a lighthearted moment, talking about the possibility of hanging out again sometime. The podcast episode draws towards its end with gratitude and well-wishing exchanged between the speakers, with everyone agreeing on the insightful and engaging nature of the dialogue. In between the serious and insightful conversation, there were exchanges of praises and appreciation for Bet David's podcast. Forgeard commends Bet David for his informative and fascinating clips, lauding him as an incredible speaker. As they wrap up the podcast, Forgeard makes a final shout out to the bars carrying their Happy Dad drink brand, fitting end to an engrossing episode from the Full Send podcast series. Bet David's experiences of Hollywood, spectacular real estate purchases, relationship tips and tricks give this episode a strong appeal, especially to those interested in understanding success from various lenses. A consistent flow of revelations, advice, and lighthearted banter make it a worth listening segment.